Take pictures.
Can I give you my jacket, Annie?
There we go. Hello, good evening, and welcome back to the Union, everyone, for our first event of the Easter term. I am utterly delighted and actually completely in awe of the incredible panel I've got in front of me today. You might recognise a few of them. So, first of all, here on the end, we have Will Buxton. Will is one of the most recognisable faces and voices in modern-day motorsport. He's a presenter, reporter, analyst, and pundit with 20 years of experience in motorsport. Will became Formula One's first digital presenter in 2018 and gained greater global attention from a famous show that a few of you might know called Drive to Survive. Then next, we're joined by Catherine Muir. So Catherine founded and is the CEO of the world's first all-female single-seater motor racing championship, W Series. Since its inaugural season in 2019, W Series has created the greatest number of professional female racing drivers of all time. In 2021, W Series entered a new landmark partnership with Formula One and supported the world's greatest premier motor racing series at 7 Grand Prix weekends. And then lastly, we're joined by Jamie Chadwick. Only at the age of 18, I'd say, Jamie, you're one of the most successful and famous female racing drivers there is out there. You're a two-time W Series world champion, and you're a current development driver for Williams' F1 team. A British Racing Drivers Club rising star, Jamie was the youngest and the first female driver to win a British GT championship. She's also done Extreme E and recently joined ex-F1 driver David Coulthard in the Race of Champions. It is an honour that you're all here, and thank you so much for joining us all. So the panel event this evening we've called The Future of Formula One. And I don't think we can talk about the future of Formula One, or in fact, motorsport, diversity, and all of that without mentioning W Series. I have been in complete shock over the rapid growth of W Series. So it's only in its third year, and it's already on the Formula One race package. You've got sponsors such as Puma, Heineken, and a huge congratulations on signing a multi-year deal with Sky recently. So, Catherine, I'm going to come to you first. Could you describe to our audience what W Series is and how you came up with the idea of it? Because if you don't mind me saying, I wouldn't say you're the most obvious candidate to have started a motorsport series.
Got no idea what you're talking about. So W Series is the first and only all-female single-seater motor racing series that the world has ever seen. I need to go back a few years just to explain how I came up with the concept. But what I would say is actually one of the defining moments of W Series creation happened 37 years ago, one December, as I was sitting in bed one morning, and my mother brought in an envelope, and I opened it up, and it was actually a really poor quality piece of paper, but it was my rejection letter from St John's to do law.
I thought you were going to say Cambridge.
And, it was St John's at Cambridge.
Oh, sorry.
So I was actually incredibly upset about not getting to St John's, and it actually caused me to feel a failure for many, many years. And actually, and I've got lots of close friends who have always, we've had over lots of drinks, lots of debates over the way I think about myself. And it's actually only until the apparent success of of W Series that I actually think that maybe I've done something that's okay in my life. So to Cambridge, you have nothing in common with me because you got here and I never bloody did. So well done, all you lot. So, but anyway, moving on, I did study law somewhere else, and I qualified as a solicitor, got bored of it quite quickly. I was a non-contentious IP lawyer, and I loved sport, so I specialised in sport. But I looked at the partners and I thought, I don't want your life. So I left sport, did a couple of years of sports marketing that I found quite boring because it was quite repetitive. And the nice thing about going into the professions is that every client presents a new set of problems, and so every day is different. And then I went into investment banking, and I went into corporate finance and did general IPO work and M&A work for 15 years. And I specialised in sport in that too. I had never had anything to do with motorsport. Moving on, I parted and I had a nice time for many years. And I got married at 42, had my first and only child at 45. Bear with me, it is all relevant. And I gave up work. And I didn't have a job for 3 years, and I got bored. And then I was trying to think about what on earth I was going to do with the rest of my career. I knew I didn't want to be an advisor anymore. I didn't want to go back to law or banking. And I genuinely had a quandary. So with a lot of the best things that have ever happened in my life, I was in the pub with a couple of friends who work in Formula One, and they suggested, what about a women's motor racing series? And literally, it started from a glass of wine. Because of my background in banking, theoretically, I knew how to draft a business plan, and theoretically, I knew how to read a contract, lots of theory. But there's this one glaring problem that you will identify, because obviously you're a lot brighter than I am because you're here and I never was, was that I had, obviously I'm not over it 37 years later, that I knew nothing about motorsport. And why would anyone take any notice of me at all? Because they would say, well, what do you know about motorsport? Which was a very valid question. So I knew David Coulthard, who one of my colleagues, Annie Bradshaw, had known for many years too. And David was a former Formula One driver, had raced for Mercedes for many years. And he commandeered a couple of his former colleagues, who was Dave Ryan, who had spent 33 years as boy and man at McLaren. When he left McLaren, he was racing director there. And Matt Bishop, who had been former communications director at McLaren too. And these two people really gave some credibility to the business because they actually knew about motorsport, unlike me. And I spent 2 years trying to raise money for the sport. And it was not an easy exercise to do, as you will understand, because I was saying, oh, can I have £20 million, please? And that's quite a hard ask from an idea that was basically, sort of developed in a pub. And there were a couple of times that genuinely I was going to give up. And it was my husband who said, no, you've got to continue because this really does have some traction. And fortunately, I did continue because I wanted to give up because I thought I've spent 18 months doing this, I haven't got anywhere. If I spent another year, then potentially I've wasted 2.5 years. Do I just cut my losses? And fortunately, I didn't, because in 2019, we partnered with DTM and we had 6 races all around Europe. And Jamie was our first champion. We had a very difficult time in 2021 because of COVID, as you'll understand. But the upside of that year was we had a very successful esports championship. You, because you're a lot younger than I, may understand why someone would want to look at someone racing esports. I have no idea, but over 1 million people wanted to watch that. But that gave us time to speak to Formula One at great length. And Chase Carey, who was the CEO at the time, really led. He had a real passion for diversity in motorsport, and he was the person who led the deal with W Series and Formula One. So last year, we had, as you said, 8 races at 7 different venues. And this year we're having 10 races at 8 different venues. And we are in a week's time, we're flying out to Miami, and we're going to be having our first race in Miami with Formula One. Right, I think I'm going to shut up now.
That's incredible. I think the biggest relief for us all is to hear that you can start an incredible business 40 plus, so no hurry there.
I was 50 plus.
Okay. So Jamie, were you originally a skeptic of W Series, or were you straight away wanting to join?
A little bit of skeptic, because I think for those that don't know, when W Series came about, as Catherine said, it was the first of, its kind. There's never been an all-female, single-seater racing series, but I don't think any all-female racing series to that level. So as a racing driver that started when I was 12 years old, always competed against the men, I had success against the men, was sort of focused on, my goal of competing in the sport professionally. I didn't see a fit for it, and almost I was like, I don't want to be part of this all-female thing when I can race against men. But at the time, I actually didn't have, necessarily the opportunities in the sport that I would have liked, or, all the doors opening that I needed. And at that point, I started to think, and a lot of people close to me that I trust a lot said W Series is going to be, a definite, it will take off for sure. And the people involved in it are too good for it not to have success. So from there, I picked up the phone to a few people that Catherine mentioned, the likes of Matt Bishop, Dave Ryan, David Coulthard, and all of them reassured me that actually what the goal of the series was to really elevate, women in the sport, give them a profile, give them the exposure that, they need, all at a professional level. So this kind of big financial barrier that a lot of racing drivers suffer with when progressing through the sport, that was kind of negated. And we could go and race basically as professional athletes at professionalized women's motorsport overnight. And when all of that was explained to me, it was kind of a no-brainer to get involved. And I guess, in my opinion, W Series has been the making of me. I would not be racing without it to this level at all. And would not be sat in this position, definitely without it.
And Will, what's your perception of it?
First of all, hello, everyone.
Sorry, yeah.
Tremendous honour to be sat here. I never tried to get into Cambridge. I never had the grades. But my dad did, and he was at John's. So it was, they had to give him they gave him a special degree to get rid of him because he kept failing. So they literally said, have that, leave, go. But a tremendous honour today to look around John's, and I appreciate that so much, and I really appreciate being here in this incredible place. W Series, hated it. Thought it was the most ridiculous idea in the world. And you know that I've said that before, because I didn't understand the need for it originally. Motor racing, for me, had always purely been about the stopwatch, and it didn't matter whether you were male or female, it didn't matter what your sexuality was, what your race was, what country you came from. It just mattered that you were quick. And that was the only thing that mattered. And that was one of the things I loved about motorsport, was it wasn't segregated between men and women. There weren't two different leagues. Everybody was based purely on their talent and their ability to drive as fast as humanly possible. And then I started to think about it. And you start to wonder, why are there not women in Formula One? Why aren't there even women in Formula 2? Or Formula 3, where is this logjam? Because we know that there are girls that start out in go-karts. So why aren't they progressing any further? And I started to look at it very much in line with other junior level series. I'm guessing you all have a fair basis in motorsport knowledge, or you wouldn't probably be interested in what we've got to say.
The Motorsport Society, I think, does.
Yes. But essentially, you know, back in the day, entry-level Formula, you had a Formula BMW, or you'd have Formula 3, and they were compartmentalized around the world. So you'd have Formula BMW USA, you'd have Formula BMW Asia, which existed purely to give racing drivers from that part of the world an opportunity to show their skills. And from that, put themselves in the shop window for Formula 3, for Formula 2, and to level up in that way. Why was W Series any different? If women weren't getting the representation at the higher levels, how was it any different to a championship that was based on nationality rather than gender? And so I immediately then came around to it, and I think had a couple of discussions with Catherine, and I thought, actually, yeah, this does make sense, because it is essentially giving an opportunity for the best female racers in the world who can't get that next step in their career, to give them a platform, to give them the opportunity to prove themselves, and by attaching themselves onto a Formula One weekend, to put themselves in the greatest shop window on earth alongside Formula 3 and Formula 2, to be in full view of Formula One teams.
I'm glad you turned that into a positive. I was a bit worried I'd invite you then
You'd invite the wrong person.
Will has written the best 2 tweets that anyone has written about W Series, and he came to our first British race at Brands Hatch in 2019, and you said, "This is beautiful, this is wonderful. I have never seen so many young kids and families at an event. This has changed motorsport."
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Oh,
and I've
pleasure.
still got them. They will go in my book.
Might have to charge you for them.
And Catherine, do you think W Series is the solution to diversity and increasing diversity in motorsport? I mean, Lewis Hamilton constantly calls F1 a billionaire boys' club. Has he got a point there? Is that the case?
Well, I think, that it certainly is from the gender point of view. It is obviously very skewed to men. It's been over 45 years since a woman has driven in a Formula One race, and one of the things that we are trying to change at W Series is that issue. But also, W Series is free to enter. We pay all of the expenses of all the drivers. We say that all the driver has to pay for is their hands device and their fare to get them to their nearest airport, and we pay for everything else. And that is because it is very important for us to find the fastest drivers in the world. So we want the fastest female drivers, and so the very fact that Jamie's won our first 2 championships is indicative of where she stands in the female pecking order in motorsport. And there, as Will says, there is that shop window thereafter for, we can't control anything else that happens outside W Series, but what we want is, for the sort of the teams in Formula 3, Formula 2, and in Formula 1 to pick up our drivers. I mean, as Jamie's associated with Williams, and we have a couple of other of our drivers who are associated with Aston Martin and
Alpine.
Cool. And I think we have changed the fortune of women already, but everyone knows that there are systemic problems in motorsport that allows very rich kids to be disproportionately successful to poor children, and that is because the parents can just afford to pay for their sons to go testing, which is a very expensive exercise through all of those formative years. I mean, Jamie's sort of, who are the Formula One drivers who are your same age? I mean, you're mates with them all. So is George your age?
Yeah, George is my age. Lando.
Yes.
Good question. Alex.
Yes. And so those 3 drivers, how many hours more do you think they've had in racing than you have had? I mean, how many multiples?
Lando's a good example of someone that's done an extortionate amount but has succeeded with that. And if you compare it to any other sport, it's the amount you should be doing. It's just unfortunate that it is a sport that requires that kind of financial backing to succeed, I guess.
Yeah. And the whole point about W Series is that once people start believing that there is a pathway for women to get into the Formula One, then the younger drivers, so I think Jamie's missing out on this, because I think there will be a lot more financial support for the young girls from 8 years old onwards. People are going to put more money into those girls because they believe there is a pathway, is the theory.
And it's incredible to have those females as role models. I mean, I was very fortunate when I was at Silverstone. I saw your hospitality, and I couldn't believe the young girls desperately trying to get photos of these female racing drivers. I know Lee McKenzie says it a lot, but if you can't see it, you can't be it. And for anybody, if anybody's at Silverstone, I cannot recommend enough swinging by the W Series fan zone. It was incredible, and it was amazing to see that. And I know, Jamie, you're a huge inspiration. Will, you did a brilliant article a few months ago, were you go about a fun 2025 grid
yeah.
prediction? And on there for Williams was Jamie.
Yes.
So maybe I'm giving her a
Thank
bit
you.
of praise here, but what was your reason for that? And could you indulge us all and give us some fun predictions for 2025?
I'd had a lot to drink. No, I'm joking.
Ouch.
No. The other predictions.
They're not bad.
Daniel at Mercedes.
Is that what you put?
Yeah.
I'm still here for it. I'm going to go with it.
No. Jamie was one of the more serious ones. A lot of them are a bit kind of, in a wacky world, what could we see? Jamie was one of the more serious ones that I put in there because I do think it's a matter of time. I've seen Jamie race over a number of years. I've seen her skill set not just against other girls, but against the boys as well. I don't think she's had a fair crack of the whip in Formula 3 yet. I still find it astonishing that big business won't get behind her to the extent to be able to afford a seat in Formula 3, a good seat in Formula 3, that she, was on the periphery of that. Going into the 2022 season, we spoke, I know, at the tail end of last year, and even, moving to America and racing out in Indy Lights was an option in order to move forward with that trajectory of your career. I do not understand why big businesses will still back a boy with half the clear ability that someone like Jamie has, but Jamie's still at risk. I don't get it. It makes zero sense to me. It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't, because we're all sitting here saying, we're all here for, equality, and it's not even about equality. It's about putting the best racers in the best seats, and Jamie is hands down one of them. She's all shy at the moment, but she hands down, she is, and she's proving it year on year. So yeah, it made perfect sense to me that if the backing came and the world woke up and saw how great she was, why couldn't she go to Formula 3 and succeed? Why couldn't she then achieve the super license points that she would get from Formula 3 to move to Formula 2 to get the super license points to make it to Formula 1? It just seemed like a no-brainer to me. So that's why Jamie was on my list of 2025 F1 drivers, because I think she deserves to be there.
Is that the response you wanted?
No, to be honest, I took it, obviously, it was very flattering to read, but also I think from my perspective and, how I see going to Formula 1, I'm under no illusions as to how hard it is to get there. But I don't think it's easy for anyone in the sport, male or female, to get that financial backing and support. It's an extortionate amount of money. But I think the bit that people also don't realise is it's not just about the financial support. It's, as Will said, the right seats in the right time. And if you look at any of the drivers that have made Formula 1, everything has been, their whole career trajectory has been to a fine detail as to how they've gone about it. And just because I'm a woman doesn't mean it should be any different. So, it's just about me kind of picking my way through. But I'm still delighted to be able to have the opportunity to be racing in W Series, and fingers crossed we can get there eventually at some point.
Well, you've done incredibly well as well, getting a role as a development driver for Williams. How is that? Do you enjoy joining the Williams team? I know you've been at some races, at race weekends, and what is it like? Are they one big family? And also, I feel we've got to reference Drive to Survive here. Is Williams exactly how it's perceived on the show?
Oh, I don't know how it's perceived on the show now. Yes, it is. I mean, well, first and foremost, I joined 3 years ago when Claire was still at the helm, and it was still, very much a family, but results weren't there. And I guess I would go into the factory after a race weekend, and they finished 19th and 20th again. And I think, what is motivating everyone here? Because you think the hours are long I think the hours are long in a normal August 9-to-5 job, but if you look at what these guys are doing, it's incredible how hard they're working, traveling the world, and I sort of question the motivation. Why would they keep doing this to finish obviously last? And you turn up and you see the history of the team, and you see what they've achieved previously, and how successful they've been. And when you consider all of that, I think that's what's sort of driven the team. And for that reason, in the last 3 years, it's been amazing to be a part of that journey and kind of see it firsthand. For any driver to get that kind of access to a Formula 1 team, of course, Drive to Survive's made it easier to see what goes on behind the scenes, but to actually be a part of it as a Formula 1 fan more than anything else has been pretty incredible. So, yeah, I'm excited to see where they go next. There's still a bit of a step to take to be fully competitive, but, yeah, it's great to be a part of it.
Well, it was wonderful seeing when you won the recent W Series Championship, George Russell, Nicholas Latifi coming out to congratulate you. I thought, that is a good family. And Will, I think we need to talk about Drive to Survive as well when it comes to you. So, how much is fact?
Far too much laughing going on.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have a lot of questions. How much is fact? How much is fiction? What should we believe?
All
What shouldn't we
lies.
believe?
That's a tough question. As you will have heard tonight, I don't pause nearly quite as often in real life as I... Editing. There is quite a lot of editing. I think I'm in a place of education, so I should probably try and pull back to something serious. I think it was Aristotle who said that...
He's so DTS, isn't he?
Not just a hat rack. I think it was Aristotle who said that history was best told through poetry because it sort of excited people and got them interested rather than just through pure fact. So, we have hundreds and thousands of years of history in which we have to ask ourselves how history has been related to us through writing, through television as we have it now, through documentary making. What is the truth? Is it what we see as our own truth? Is it what other people see as their own truths when they're making something about us? The Last Dance, the Chicago Bulls documentary, incredibly popular, incredibly successful, roundly seen as one of the best sports documentaries ever made. Michael Jordan's production company made that documentary. They weren't in the credits, but they were a big part of the production team. Michael Jordan was one of the exec producers, not credited as one, but was. So did we get a real view of what was going on there, or was it slightly skewed towards Jordan's view of how those things happened? There's always nuance. We're not going to see ourselves in the same way that other people see us. I think if you hold up a mirror to a racing driver, they're not going to like what they see all of the time. I've interviewed Sebastian Vettel. After 2017 in Baku, remember when he drove into Lewis? I interviewed him straight after that. And I said, why did you drive into Lewis? He said, because he brake checked me. I said, no, not the bit when you went into the back of him, the bit when you drove into the side of him. He couldn't remember it. He'd completely blanked it out. It was like he couldn't see this thing that he'd done. He'd completely just washed it out of his mind. Couldn't see it. And I think sometimes when you do hold up that mirror, people, they don't like what they see back. So the guys in Drive to Survive, they can't put words in people's mouths. No matter how much people think that I'm scripted, I'm not. Trust me.
Obviously.
25 hours of interviews a year. If it took me 25 hours to do that level of banality, then there'd be something wrong. But, they don't put the words into Lando's mouth when he says, he didn't care what was going on with Daniel. Those were his words. They can't just create something out of nothing. These things do exist. They can't just magic a story out of somewhere. But I do agree that in this last series, it may have just slightly missed the mark a little bit in terms of narrative storytelling for the year. And that's because Drive to Survive was a mistake. The way in which Drive to Survive happened in Series 1 was a pure mistake because Ferrari and Mercedes wanted nothing to do with the series. So they didn't have the opportunity to tell the championship story, and they had to go searching for other stories in the paddock. So they found crazy sweary Gunther, and they found and they found Max and Daniel, and all these great stories that were just bubbling under the surface that people didn't see because the primary focus was Mercedes and Ferrari. Then season 2, Mercedes and Ferrari said, well, we want a bit of that. We want to be involved with it. And by then, the die was already cast. It was about the human stories. It was about what made the sport interesting beneath the surface. And so then when we finally got through to a year where we had a proper championship fight, did they get the balance right? Possibly not. But I think that's something that they'll learn if they get a season 5. And that guy's really putting me off the whole way through. Not because you're stroking your boobs, because you look just like Daniel Ricciardo. But you see, if you've been a big fan since the late 90s, I'm not convinced the show's for you. I think the show is primarily aimed at drawing in a new audience, getting them interested in those stories. Because you watch it, if you've been a fan since the 90s, you're going to watch a scene at Silverstone, and you're like, that's the Spa pit lane, and that bit was from Austria, and yeah, look, there's a little bit of poetic license thrown in there. Do they invent stories out of nothing? No. Would the storylines be different if I was on the production team? You bet. But I'm not, so I have no influence over it. Sorry.
Actually, this is more for my benefit. Out of interest in here, who started watching F1 because of Drive to Survive? If you could put a hand up. I'm just intrigued. Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's good. And I'm going to go on to the last question now, because I'm sure you're all itching to ask some questions. I think we've got a lot of motorsport fans in here that are desperate to go into the industry. Is it a hard industry to get into? And maybe Will, Catherine, I'll ask you more this side. And what would you recommend for people that want to pursue a career in motorsport and maybe reach Formula one day working that industry? What advice would you give?
Well, I would say what not to do. So 2 weeks ago, I received a LinkedIn message from a young lady who said to me, "Dear Catherine, I would love to come and work for W Series because I'm desperate to work in Formula One, and I think it would be a good training venue to come and work for you for a year because maybe someone in Formula One will accept a job with me." That's not the way to do it. But it is, I think, and Annie would know what Formula One was like historically, because Annie Bradshaw, who works at W Series, is the lady who's sitting here. She has worked in Formula One for over 50 years, so she had a 50th anniversary, or worked in motorsport for over 50 years. Everyone knows her. She's worked in Formula One for many decades. She knows absolutely everyone. And she is the first and only woman to win the Lifetime Achievement Award at Motorsport UK Awards. So well done, Annie, for doing that. So I think, and I may revert to Annie for this, because I think historically Formula One was very much a closed shop. It was mates employing mates, whereas now, I know with the Formula One teams, they will only recruit engineers from the best engineering universities. It is brutally difficult to get in now, and they are only taking the best graduates in whatever area you want to do. I mean, my personal advice to anyone is motorsport is this wonderful sport because it employs not only mechanics, engineers, lawyers, accountants, marketers, people in PR. I mean, it's just the whole gamut of anything that will, anyone who wants to work in any sort of business. I think you need to go and do what you love. And if you have that love of motorsport too, then just qualify, be the best that you can possibly be in that thing that you love, and then move across to Formula One after that is my advice.
Yeah, agreed. I agreed. It is, I've always held it to be sort of the best of the best in every single job role. I stupidly set out just to go and work in Formula One from the age of 13 and achieved it by sort of elbowing my way in. I think the only thing that you can do in whatever you do in life is just be true to yourself. If it's in terms of getting in there as a broadcaster or a journalist or whatever, I think it's find your voice and be true to that, because that's the one thing that sets you apart from anybody else. The one thing that you have, you don't need to learn, you don't need to discover it from anywhere. It's already in there. That's you.
But that's why you're so good in Drive to Survive, because that really comes through.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But no, I think if you want to work in Formula One, as Catherine says, hone your craft, discover what it is that makes you tick, discover what it is that you want to do for the rest of your life, become phenomenal at it. If Formula One is the goal, Formula One will ultimately disappoint you, and you'll end up ultimately disappointed by Formula One, because the goal maybe shouldn't be Formula One, it should be doing that thing that you love to the absolute best of your ability. And if Formula One comes along as part of that, mega. But I wouldn't set it as your absolute goal.
That's good advice, thank you. So we will open up the floor to questions now. If you could just say who you want to direct your question to, Jamie, Catherine, or Will, or the entire panel, please let us know. So have we got any questions? Yes, here at the front.
Thank you. Yeah, question for Will. As the world looks towards net zero targets and decarbonisation, there's an increasing lens on motorsport, and particularly Formula One, to lead in the transition to net zero and to zero carbon. Sorry, I'm muddling my words there. How do you see Formula One reacting to this, and do you think that it's going far enough? Do you think that there's more to be done? And motorsport in general, how do you see it reacting to becoming more sustainable?
I should probably preface this answer by saying that I sit here in an independent capacity and not in any way aligned with Formula One or its position. So whatever I say is not on behalf of Formula One. Otherwise, I'm going to get fired. Look, we stand at a clear juncture in history, not just in terms of sport or motorsport, but in society and in our daily lives of deciding where we go and how we live our lives in our future. Can Formula One and motorsport be doing more? Absolutely. How does it go about it? Is the great unanswered question. And I think ultimately Formula One needs to ask itself what it wants to be. Is it entertainment? Is it road relevant? Is it, wanting to make an impact on society? And until it has an answer for that, I really don't know whether we can answer the question over whether it's hitting the metrics that we would expect it to. It is making changes. It is attempting to become more carbon neutral. The teams themselves are moving themselves in that direction because obviously, it helps them in terms of sustainability. Financially, it helps them as well. There's also regulatory factors now as well. The fuel we're using in Formula One, is more sustainable from what I understand of its makeup. It's E10 now. But it's the big question, and every business and every sport, and in particular Formula One, has to ask itself that question in the future. What do we want to be? And it was Lucas di Grassi, actually, the Formula E driver who used to drive in Formula One, said motorsport has to ask itself a question, and Formula One might have to ask itself a question. When people move from horses being our mode of transportation to cars, did horse racing finish? No, horse racing continued. When we move from the internal combustion engine as we know it to future methods, does that internal combustion engine die, or can it exist alone for entertainment purposes alone? I don't have an answer for that, but I think that's something that it needs to be addressed, and for all of us, for the world, it needs to be addressed soon.
Could I butt in there?
Yeah,
Because I do have a locus standi in this. So I sit on the board of Motorsport UK and also on the sustainability for Motorsport UK. What motorsport has always been, especially Formula One, which is basically based in the UK, has been a drive for technical brilliance and also technical change. I think there are three main areas with the motor car that motorsport can help as far as decarbonising ourselves. One is obviously fuel. Now, for example, Paddy Lowe, who has worked for a number of Formula One teams as technical director, he has set up a company that is developing completely sustainable fuel. And this is potentially, life-changing for the whole planet, because it gives an alternative to the internal combustion engine, and we don't have to go 100% electric if cars can run on 100% sustainable fuels. And so there is a huge amount of effort from people who used to be involved in motorsport to develop technology as far as fuel is concerned. And that fuel is potentially much more important for aircraft, for example, because aircrafts are much more polluting than motor cars are. So if the people involved in motorsport and historically involved in motorsport can be part of that solution, then that is, I think, it shows extraordinary progress. But goes back to the technological capabilities and the high standards that motorsport expects of itself. Motorsport is also working incredibly hard on what we do with tyres. So it doesn't matter if you're in an electric car, you've still got to deal with what on earth do you do with tyres. And there are a number of new technologies that are being developed so that tyres can be recycled 100%. And then, of course, most cars are made from carbon fibre, which by its very definition, especially motorsport cars, cannot be recycled. And so that is another big thing that is being developed by both motorsport and Formula One is how we deal with that. So what we need in the future are modes of transport with all of those so that the bodywork, the tyres and the fuel can be 100% sustainable. And motorsport is certainly working and is at the forefront of that technological push to provide the solutions to those three problems.
To pick up on that, one thing I've always wanted to see and would love to see in the future is a Formula Future. So we have Formula E, but Formula E
Should we set it up?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it. So for Formula E, obviously, has very clear parameters of what it is, where it's going, and it's a very closed shop. Why can't we have a Formula Future that is completely open from a regulatory perspective? Because if you've already decided what the future is and you only head down one path, then you close off all other possibilities, all other potential future avenues. Why? What is it that we know now in 2022 that makes us so sure that that one route is the right route? Why close off all the other avenues? And motorsport, I can't remember what the old quote's, ancient old quote, it says, war and motor racing are the two biggest drivers for technological development. So stick it all on a racetrack. You're so sure that hydrogen isn't the future? Great, well, let's develop it. See what we can do with it. I'd love to see. Well, not in Formula One. An individual championship that isn't Formula E, is just a total Formula Future. You've got an idea, you've got a concept of how we can make sustainable cars for the future of this planet? Great, let's see it. Let's race it. Let's make it work.
Izzy down here.
Hi, my question's for Jamie. I was just wondering how you got into racing, especially because, as we kind of discussed, there's not so many female role models, and what you do, if you actively try to be a role model, you're not too fussed.
Okay, so first part of that question, how I got into it, just by accident, to be honest. I grew up in the Isle of Man, which is a bit of a sort of motorsport haven. They have the TT and stuff there. So I was exposed to motor racing in some respect, but never took part in it. It was my parents had no background, but it was my older brother that started in go-karts. And I guess sibling rivalry is what I always say is why I kind of gave it a go for the first time. And yeah, I just did it as a hobby. I did it once a month. I remember I was at school at the time, sort of between the ages of 12 and sort of 16, and I would do it as a hobby and didn't tell anyone. I just did it as sort of on low-key as possible because I didn't want anyone to find out. And then it just progressed, and I had to start sort of specialising in it. The time that it took a commitment was much greater, so I had to start, focusing a bit more on it. And from there I just started to sort of see these opportunities come about, and I was fortunate in that sense for a few reasons. One, my parents never forced me to do it, which I think is key, because if you're doing something, we see it a lot in racing, because it is an expensive sport, even just to get into it grassroots. When the parents have a financial kind of stake in your career, we see it so often we call them karting dads, and it's horrible to watch. So fortunately, I never had any of that. And I just did it, like I said, for myself. I wasn't, necessarily trying to emulate someone I looked up to or anything like that. So in that sense, I didn't necessarily need a role model to start in the sport. But later on, as I progressed through the sport, I became very happy to settle just to have a career. And I think the reason I felt like that was because I didn't see someone in Formula One. And when I say happy to have a career, I looked at all options of sports car racing, all sorts of different avenues in the sport. And I think the reason for that was because there wasn't a female Formula One driver. I didn't see that as being an obvious thing that I could necessarily achieve. So at that point, I started to kind of pave my own pathway a little bit and try and understand what I could do. And obviously W Series came about at the perfect time as well, with that in mind. And I guess I don't really see myself at all as a role model because I'm just doing it for myself, very selfishly speaking. But at the same time, I am, and the older I get with this, I know you said I was 18, I'm not, I'm 23.
Did I say 18?
Yeah, but we'll go
Sorry,
with
I
18.
meant 23. Sorry.
I now look at the young girls coming through in W Series that's of 17, 18, and I believe that they have such a great opportunity, even if I'm too late to kind of pave the pathway as such. I think it's cool to see what's coming through and exciting also for the sport to see that.
Question to Catherine, but sort of open to the whole panel. You talked about the financial issues, the fact that teams require a lot of money for you to get into F1, and how the W Series is trying to level the playing field, cut those costs out. But those costs are still involved with F1. We see a lot of drivers getting in. You think of Mazepin getting in because dad can fund the team and fund the race and fund the racing car. Is the problem that F1 needs to achieve greater financial equality, and how do you think that should be done before we get gender equality in F1? Or is it going to be the case that the next female F1 driver is just a girl who happens to be born into a wealthy enough family?
I think the next Formula One driver will be someone who is so fast that a lot of money will go into them because suddenly there's a rush to finding or wanting to support that person who will be that. So, but I mean, all my Christmases would come in one day if Jamie got into Formula One in 2025. But I don't even think that our current youngsters of 16 and 17 are necessarily going to get in. I think the next female Formula One driver may be 9 or 10 years old at the moment. And then they are going to be a woman that is, whipping the arse of all the boys, at a very young age, pre-puberty. And then they will be seen, just as Lewis was picked up at an incredibly early age by Ron Dennis. How old was Lewis?
13, I think.
Yes, but that was but he went up to Ron when he was about, was he 13?
He was 13 at the Autosport
Right.
Awards.
To say, so, but
They're getting
when
into
you
it a lot
hear-
younger now, though.
yeah, but Lewis was so much faster
Yeah.
than everyone else, wasn't he? I mean, you hear the people who were who raced with Lewis at a young age, and he was just head and shoulders above everyone else. And I think a young girl will appear, and then suddenly I think that girl will attract a huge amount of money, and it is that money that will take her through.
And the problem isn't just Formula One. For Jamie to move up to the next level, you've got to find, how much is it for a Formula 3 seat these days? 1.2?
Yeah, about that.
1.2 million euros. To get a Formula 2 seat, 2.2, 2.5? Well, the problem, it's an eternal problem of Formula One. It's not like football, where you can play for a non-league side or your Sunday team, and you get picked for, or you're a kid and you play, you get taken into the academy at Chelsea or wherever, and you play your way through into the under-21s. Is anyone going to pay Oldham Athletic under-21s $2 million a season to go and play for them, on the off chance that they might get into the senior team, or that a scout from Man United might see them and sign them up? Not in a million years. It's the only sport in the world where talent takes you so far and the bank balance takes you the rest. And it's criminally unfair, but it's been this way forever. When you find the answer, because Niki Lauda would have never made it into Formula One without backing. Niki was a pay driver. Niki bought his way in. One of the greatest of all time. Senna, if he didn't have the backing from Nacional and his family, would he have got in? No. It's this bizarre sport where you need that backing to take you through. As Catherine said, is it going to take a girl turning up and doing a Lewis and being, so mesmerizingly fast that no one can ignore them? Or can you actually recognize that Jamie here, or whoever follows Jamie, is on the level with the boys that are considered to be the best of their generation? And is that enough? And that should be enough. It should be more than enough. Because if they've got the pace of a Lando or a George, well, why don't they have the backing of a Lando or a George? And that ultimately falls to representation and being seen, which is what W Series does, which is what Jamie's doing. And hopefully, in the next 5 or 10 years, when a Jamie Chadwick of the future, who's 10, 11 years old and in go-karting, goes to a business and says, I need X amount of money to go to Formula 3, they don't laugh her out of the office. They go, yeah, because we see the potential that exists.
To be honest, I think that is starting to change. To sort of answer your question, I don't think the amounts of money can change, because as much as it costs, and I look at sort of the budget of a Formula 3 seat, and I think that's insane, you do actually see where the money goes when you turn up to the racetrack, and Catherine will vouch for this more than anyone, having to find it for W Series. The amount of people that are involved in the sport, and yeah, just to go to the venues, take the cars out, everything. I don't think the cost will change, but what I have noticed a difference in is Formula One teams investing now in junior talent, and I'm outside of that kind of generation, but Mercedes, for example, have, I think, 5 or 6 junior drivers. 4 or 5 of them are under the age of 13, 14. I don't know what financial support there is there, but if you think a Formula One team spending, well, in previous years, 600 million at Mercedes, a couple of million in the junior driver's career is still a drop in the ocean. So that is changing, and I do think that's going to start to have to really start making progress, because without that, the sport will just be the likes of Mazepin and Stroll, even though he probably warrants his place now. Yeah, taking the grid.
Right, apologies. We have time for 2 quick questions, because Jamie's actually got to whiz off to the airport because she is going racing. But I think Will and Catherine, you might be around a tiny bit after if you've got a burning question. But yes,
I
apologies.
can stay here for as long as anyone wants. I'm good. I'll sit and answer questions all night.
Perfect. So yes, apologies. Only 2 more questions. We'll have one on the front row here.
I just wanted to know, where does W Series sort of rank right now in the sort of formula pecking order? And what's the goal for W Series? Do you want it to be a parallel maybe for like a women's Formula One, or do you want it to be maybe a direct feeder into Formula One like F2 currently is?
Really, really interesting question, and we do think about it a lot. At the moment, we're a Formula 3 car, but it's a much lower spec than the International Formula 3 that Jamie is referring to. So we currently sit below the International Formula 3. We're above Formula 4. But in future years, so we picked this level car in 2019 because we needed to find 20 drivers across the world that could race them properly, because there weren't that many drivers around. Originally we were going to go for a Japanese Super Formula car and just turn the engine down a bit, and then over the years we could increase that engine. But it was actually Gerhard Berger, who we were racing with, who ran DTM at the time, who said, just go for this Tartarus car that we go for now, because you'll get good racing, and that's what you need to be able to demonstrate. So we will have a second generation car, and that will be more powerful. But where that currently sits in relation to Formula 3 and Formula 2 is probably something that could potentially be controversial, so I don't particularly want to talk about it at the moment.
Okay, thank you. This is for everyone, but Will, I think you would have noticed that recently you've become sort of an internet sensation. Some of your quotes from Drive to Survive.
How do you win a Formula
Sorry
One?
to traumatize you. So I just wanted to ask, what you guys think how Drive to Survive and social media in general has changed the industry.
I was going to ask you how you win a Formula One race.
Huh?
I was going to ask you how you win a Formula One race.
How I won a Formula One race?
How one wins.
By finishing ahead of everyone else. But it's got to the extent that my daughter now recognizes. She said, "Dad, you're just a meme now." Live long enough. Drive to Survive has been huge for Formula One. Around the world, bringing in so many new viewers and getting them interested and excited. I broadcast to the States for a decade, and I've never seen the level of interest that you have in the US that you have now. So it's been wonderful. Social media is a really difficult one, and I don't know if it has to do with sort of a latent toxicity that exists just within us as people or within the F1 community. The F1 community was never toxic when I was a kid. I remember going to Silverstone as a boy with my dad and standing on the banks with people of different nationalities supporting different drivers, and everyone was just cheering for the same thing because you loved motor racing, and you were united by it. So the sniping and the aggression and the anger and threats and you know, things that are just thrown about, you know, with ease online, I don't recognize it. I don't know where it comes from, and I don't like it. I hate it. Because surely the thing that we all love is the thing that unites us, which is this passion for motor racing. But I think it's just intrinsic with social media, and particularly with Twitter, and the notions of confirmation bias that exists within that bubble of just following people that reflect back to us the opinions that we already hold. So you're never challenged. Places like this great hall where we can debate and we can talk, we can argue politely with reason. That's what the internet was supposed to be. That's what Twitter was supposed to be. It was supposed to open this up so we could debate and discuss with people from around the world, not just shout them down because they didn't necessarily agree with us 100% on every aspect. I don't know how we resolve that, or if we can resolve that. Don't think Elon's going to resolve it. So it's hard and it's horrible, and I hate it, you know? I didn't say anything after Abu Dhabi last year because I wanted to see the report published before I made a comment. And I got death threats through, and not just against me, but against my daughter and my mum and my fiance. Why?
And you, sort of, with respect, I mean, your involvement in it was nothing like Michael Mass's. Now,
No,
I mean,
and
poor old Michael,
yeah.
I mean, is just what he had to go through.
Guy screwed up, but, you know, we all screw up.
But we all do, and he had a bad day in the office. But for him to have been the focal point for thousands and thousands of people over a period of months was absolutely unacceptable, and it was actually disgusting, because whilst he may have made the wrong decision, he is a really, really nice bloke, and for someone like that to have been treated in the way like he was by social media was wholly unacceptable.
I don't know how we resolve it, you know, and it's not something that we in this room will resolve, I guess, unless we each just treat everybody a bit kinder online and don't automatically jump to the immediate place of somebody disagreeing with you. And I'm sure you won't do that because we are in this great debating place. Yeah, Jamie, I don't know how you view social media and the crap that you get on it. Am I allowed to say crap? I just said crap.
But you did. You had a really tough time when you stayed at W Series this year, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a brutal environment, I guess. But there's a lot of positives with it as well. I just deleted the apps, to be honest with you. I remember, actually, it was quite good, because before I announced I was staying with W Series, I was at a Williams thing, and I was with Nikki Latifi, and this was in December. And we had, because we're with the other Williams board members, including the PR team, and someone just said, "Oh, how are things with you on social now, Nikki, things calm down?" And he sort of spoke about it at length for a good half an hour, and hearing what he went through as well as Michael was pretty horrendous, to be honest. So that kind of put things into perspective. And Nicky's one of the nicest guys in the world. He's racing a Formula 1 car at the weekends. His life is pretty good. And when you put things into perspective like that, I think you just got to shut it out. But it's an environment, like Will said, I don't know how you change it. Everything has to be taken with a pinch of salt. But yeah, it's, I think, the world we live in now.
And I want to finish on a positive note. Quick one, who's going to win the World Championship this year in Formula 1 and in W Series?
Formula
Jamie?
1... Till the weekend, I would have said Charles.
Is that it? Is he screwed it now?
Well,
That's
no,
it.
a little bit, because I think it's all about momentum in this championship, and I think the momentum swung now.
Mate, it's 4 races.
Yeah,
I know. But I think the
we
momentum
barely
swung.
reached the end of the first chapter. I mean, I think it was a good, sort of interesting chapter.
I know, but I was so adamant that was it for Ferrari, but I think now the momentum... Well, we saw it, I think Ferrari make mistakes. I think Red Bull are unstoppable. I would have loved to have said Mercedes, but that's not going to happen, so yeah, Verstappen.
Catherine?
Verstappen and Jamie.
I think everyone would be very disappointed if I didn't say the driver with the most points.
Jamie's got to go racing. I think Will and Catherine are going to hang around, but thank you so much, and please join me in a huge round of applause.
See you later. Do you want us to stay for more questions?
Do you want to stay? We'll stay for...
If people have got more
You can stay for more
questions, you're welcome to leave if you have got somewhere to go. But if you want to ask Catherine and Will some more questions, you're welcome to, if we want to. Brilliant.
Gentlemen in the glasses.
Yeah, a huge fan, Will, and thank you all for your time. So I was born and raised in Kenya, and I was just wondering if you think Formula One has a future in Africa?
Absolutely, yeah. Do you want to take it first?
No?
So I was very lucky. A long time ago now, 2004, I was over in South Africa, Kalami. Wonderful track, could very easily be turned into an F1 suitable track. And I believe there are plans in place at the moment to try and take it back to South Africa. Yes, it's a world championship. It has to be on the African continent. Absolutely no two ways about it for me.
I agree.
Cool.
Yep.
At the front here.
Hi. To both of you, it's kind of been a controversial thing recently, but given the push for diversity, do you think we should still be racing in these countries where it's not accepted, or in some cases illegal? What do you make of this?
For women to be racing?
For example, with Saudi Arabia. Not just the gender equality, but...
No,
I can't talk about it, don't worry about it.
So you're more closely associated with it. We don't currently race in the Middle East, but from my point of view, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't at all. But what I don't want to do as W Series is go into a country and then leave it again quickly. I think we need to leave a footprint or have some activations or on-the-ground constant activity about promoting women. I do believe that sport is a massive power for change across the world. And as such, I think if W Series goes to Saudi, Qatar, or anywhere in the Middle East, for example, if that's what you're potentially alluding to, I think that we can be part of that change that I think is already happening in those countries. I think the gender, for what we would do as a gender issue, is a lot easier than something like the LGBTQ plus issue. So I'm chair of the EDI committee at Motorsport UK, and I think that is, and we promote disability, accessibility, women in motorsport, LGBTQ plus as well as racial diversity. And we all have mutual friends who are gay, who work in Formula One. And I think that is possibly a much more uncomfortable issue to deal with than actually gender. Because they do want to, I think all the countries in the world, I mean, I think very few are like, Afghanistan, is that everyone is looking to move female empowerment. But I think places like Qatar for the World Cup, for example, they've made an announcement to say, we will welcome gay people. It's just don't show you are. So there's, I think, so, and it's not just motorsport who deal with those issues. Obviously, the football, the World Cup is having to grapple with those too. But there are people like Sebastian Vettel, who I think has been just a masterclass in promoting diversity and actually standing up, wearing his rainbow shoes. Obviously, Lewis has been really promoting diversity too. And I think those drivers will leave a massive legacy for standing up for diversity as well as their brilliance in motorsport.
And those drivers are also huge fans of W Series. I mean, I've seen Lewis posting a lot about W Series. Sebastian's exactly the same, so it's wonderful to see their support.
Well, they're all mates fans, and she makes them do it.
Any other? I think we'll take two more, and then you can catch Catherine or Will and the orator. Yes, over here.
Yeah, I guess it's just like a question about what do you think about having so many races on the calendar, especially this year. Like, as much as we all love to see the content and see races and see people doing that, it is obviously like a very big effort for everyone to do, and how that affects everyone, especially towards the end of the year.
So we only have 8 races at 8 events with 10 races. As someone who has, I mean, as I've told you, I'm a very old mother. I have one child. I feel very guilty when I have to spend a lot of time away. I only have one child, so I am missing my only child's 9th birthday when I'm in Miami. That is really tough. Motorsport has been traditionally very male, and there's been sort of this expectation that the men can, the mechanics, the engineers can just do 23 races, which puts a massive strain on anyone's relationship with their partner as well as their children. I think I want to make 2 points about that. Is one, that I think that limits women going into the sport in becoming mechanics and engineers, because I think it's just incredibly difficult to, if not impossible, to have children. But then I have a marriage where we have true partnership in the care of our child. And my husband gives up a lot of his time, and he has a very time-demanding job too. But what I'm saying is about that is that we shouldn't have those, look at Formula One and say those traditional roles are preventing women from going into Formula One. Actually, what it's stopping is men who have all of these jobs in Formula One is having the same sort of marriage that I do that equally shares childcare. And therefore, I don't quite know what the answer is, because if you're a business that's owned by private equity, the impulsion is always going to be make more profit, which means more races. But with a salary, with a wage cap, or is an expense cap, what I think the way to keep people human is obviously to have split roles and have 2 people and have split seasons with the same number of people in that. But I don't know how you're going to be able to do that with the expense cap that you have at the moment. Sorry, I've rambled on, but I think I've said what I want to say on that.
I agree with Catherine, but I don't know if it's a male versus female question or a single versus attached question. I think if you're single and probably young, you can go out and smash 23 races out, no problem. But if you have a wife or a husband, if you have children, it's a lot of time away from home. Motor racing is a sacrifice. The seasons are a sacrifice. You spend more time away from home than you do at home. You miss birthdays, weddings, funerals. You forget what your friends look like. Your friends become the people that you travel with. Your family becomes the people that you room with. I joked for a long time that a hairy 50-year-old Scot was my Formula One wife. Lovely bloke, but
That's my actual husband you've just described.
Are 23 races too many? Is that a sustainable or an unsustainable season? As Catherine was alluding to, again, we exist in Formula One under a budget cap. In the old days, there used to be specific testing teams who would just go and pound around the tracks in between the races, and then you'd have your race team. You almost need those 2 teams to exist nowadays to complete 23 races in a season, because the level of exhaustion that will set in, not just from the sheer amount of work that is involved, but the amount of international travel to get 23 races done in a period between March and the end of November with a month break in August is tremendous. I know a lot of people at a lot of teams who are on the verge of walking away. I've seen people descend into depression and alcoholism through the stresses and the strains of the job, people whose marriages, whose lives have completely fallen apart because they've dedicated themselves to the business. Anybody who does this job sacrifices a huge amount to do it. Ultimately, it's a bit like, a Ferrari or a Ford. They mass produce Fords and they become worth less. They don't make so many Ferraris and they become worth more. So ultimately, the business model has to be, do you want more and they're worth less, or do you want fewer and they're worth more? And then where does your loyalty sit? Is it to the dollar in the pocket or to the people on the ground? Decisions for those far higher than us to decide, I think.
And talking of doing lots of races, Anne, can I be cheeky? You've done 50 years of motorsport. How many F1 races have you done?
I have no idea, but I think, luckily when I started, there weren't 23 races. There were 16, and it did make a difference. I mean, you're right about testing. I used to come back from a race, and 2 days later go testing somewhere, and then, so I did do a lot of things, but it was a lot easier on people's home lives. The thing is that there is the demand. I mean, in those days, we mainly stayed in Europe. Okay, I remember going to South Africa and Brazil, but the bulk was in Europe. And now there are so many countries that see Formula One as a cash cow for different reasons. And when we went to Bahrain, people said, why are we going to Bahrain? And I asked the people themselves, I said, we want to get tourists in, because we're going to run out of oil. So it's very different things, but there is a lot of desire out there to have a Formula One race, and it's very different to us sitting here saying it's killing these people, to the guy who owns Liberty Media who's going to say, well, suddenly something I bought for, I don't know, £1 billion is going to be worth 5 billion. So why don't they go? It's just bringing more money. Teams want to do it, so let them do it.
And final question, and then we're going to wrap up for the evening. We got any more?
There's one over there.
Yep. Over there.
Hi, the question to both of you. So in recent years, F1 has experimented a lot with different weekend structures. We had that elimination qualifying a few years back that very quickly got eliminated. We then, in the past year or so, we've seen introduction of sprint races having mixed success. So I just want to know, what do you think the modern race weekend should look like?
Should I start with this one?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. I made a video about this a couple of years ago. It nearly got me fired, so let's go. So, sprint races have come in, and personally, I really like the sprint race. The problem that you have with the sprint race as it exists is ultimately you're adding 100 kilometers onto a Formula One race and throwing a red flag overnight between Saturday and Sunday. There is that capability to kind of nullify a great result in qualifying by the end of the sprint race, and then you just continue it into what could be ultimately a dull race on the Sunday if nobody has a grid penalty or something like that. So I think we recognize that sprint races are here to stay. I know Ross wants to get 6 on the calendar for next year. So how do you create a scenario where sprint races exist, but you keep the interest in the Grand Prix on the Sunday and you don't just throw a red flag overnight? I think Formula One's made a bit of a rod for its own back in determining that pole position should be given to whoever finishes fastest in qualifying, but still deciding that the sprint race sets the grid. Because for the entire history of Formula One, it's never been about who finished qualifying fastest. It's been about who is placed first on the grid on Sunday morning that gets the pole position. You can be fastest in qualifying and get disqualified from qualifying. You don't get pole position. You get a grid penalty, you don't get pole position. So why should it be that whoever finishes qualifying on the Friday this year gets pole position? From a statistical analysis sort of a perspective, it's a nightmare. So let's say you want pole position to be for the qualifying, fine. Then qualifying sets the grid for the Grand Prix. Done. Qualify on Friday night, that's your grid set then for the Grand Prix. So on the Saturday, let's have a sprint. And how do we do it? Let's make it standalone. Now, there's any number of grids you can formulate through that. You can have the F2, where you have the qualifying, but the top 10 positions are reversed. You could take it on the finishing positions from FP2. Don't get me started on that, because that is a pointless exercise, because the car's already in Parc Fermé. You could do reverse championship order, or you could take reverse championship order and just reverse each of the top 10. So the driver who's first in the championship starts 10th, driver who's 10th starts first, and then the second half, driver who's 20th starts 11th, and so on. There's any number of ways you could do it and create something exciting. But I think that watching Lewis fight back in Brazil from the back of the field, watching Carlos and Checo fight through the field in Imola on a track where we know it's hard to overtake, shows the benefit of having inversion on the grid in some respects. And I think that for a sprint race, an inverted grid of some kind for a standalone event, I think that would be fantastic. But again, I don't make the decisions. But if I did, that's what I'd ideally like to do with the sprint.
I'll just answer it slightly differently, just on formats generally. So what we did was basically invent a new sport, and we could have done whatever we wanted for our races. And we just decided that we were going to have a race that was half an hour plus 1 lap, and that is what we thought was the optimum time that people wanted to watch a motor race outside Formula One, especially if you're wanting to develop it, because you want to keep it interesting and exciting, and you don't want it just to be, you know, Jamie going off at the front and, you know, lapping people towards the end 90 minutes later, because that isn't going to grow an audience. So we've purposefully kept our race relatively short, to half an hour, which is why I like the sprint races, because I understand why they're doing that, because that's what they're doing in a half an hour. We did do a reverse grid. Unfortunately, with Formula One, we've got very limited time on track because there's so much track activity over Formula One weekend. And I would love to be able to do more reverse grids. We did one in Aston in 2019. Alice Powell, who came second in our championship last year, she was bitching all weekend about how slow our car was. She was slow. She started from near the back of the grid and overtook 17 cars and finished second, but there was, and I'll get this right, 0.0006 seconds between her and the first car. Literally, it was a hair in between them. I mean, it was the most stunning race, and there was so much overtaking, and it was just incredibly entertaining. And I mean, it would be great to see in Formula One, wouldn't it? I mean, just as a trial. But, you know, there's so much more, except, you know, we can experiment because there isn't this, you know, this whole world that has an opinion on us yet. So with Formula One, you know, whatever they do, it's scrutinized so carefully that, and viciously sometimes, that I think Formula One does have to come out and think very much more carefully about different formats than we would. But so we will stick with our half hour. I'm constantly asked, are we going to have longer races? No, we're not. We're going to stay at that. But I would love us to be able to do more reverse grids.
Excellent. I'm so sorry we're going to have to wrap up there. Thank you again. We'll have another round of applause, and you might be able to catch Will and Catherine later. Thank you. Okay. Thanks for coming out. So, yeah, thank you.
After you.
Thank you. Brilliant.